You know, the neat thing about the X-Men corner of the Marvel Universe is how diverse every character is, from their powers to their personality to their backgrounds. It doesn't matter which mutant we're talking about, everyone is someone's favorite. There's a few characters out there that enjoy a bit more popularity than others though. One such character is the Raging Cajun himself, Gambit. Gambit, real name Remy LeBeau, was kidnapped as a newborn by a thieves guild. He was taught their way of life and thief skills at a young age, which led to him making a pickpocket attempt, only to find out that the person he tried to steal from was the patriarch of the LeBeau Thieves clan. Impressed by Remy's skills, he officially adopted him into his personal care. Gambit has the power to take the potential energy of an object and convert it into kinetic energy, leading to the object releasing all of the energy stored at once by exploding. He can do this with all manners of objects, but his preference is for playing cards, due to their small size making it easier for him to charge quickly as well as their utility as a projectile. Gambit's also well versed in martial arts as well, with his particular style of choice being Bojutsu, and he's rarely seen without his bow staff. With his trench coat, his smooth talking personality, and his playing card projectiles, a lot of people, including myself, just found Gambit inherently cool. I know he was definitely one of my favorite characters in X-Men the Animated Series growing up, and that was probably the case for a lot of people that weren't already fans due to the comics. Gambit's first appearance in the Versus series was in 1996's X-Men vs. Street Fighter, but he was initially pitched for an earlier Capcom fighter. In Polygon's Oral History of X-Men Children of the Atom article, which is also a very good read by the way, I'll link to it in the video description, former Capcom USA producer Alex Jimenez states that when Children of the Atom's development team was making roster deliberations, he pitched Gambit as a potential option. The developers rejected his proposal though, apparently saying that Gambit was a liar, a cheat, a thief, and didn't have a place with the other heroic X-Men on the roster. Clearly, they changed their minds by the time of X-Men vs. Street Fighter. Either that or they realized there was no getting around his popularity. Gambit has some of my favorite animations in the series, as everything from his special moves to his win poses to even his idle stance is oozing with personality. According to the game's secret arcade flyer, a Japan-only flyer given out with Capcom arcade units that contain developer trivia and interviews, Gambit was one of the trickier characters to animate, primarily because of his coat. Gambit's voice actor in the Versus games is Tony Daniels, reprising his role from X-Men the Animated Series. He also voiced Gambit as well as Wolverine in another set of X-Men fighters, the Mutant Academy series from Paradox Development. The Mutant Academy series were 2.5D and later 3D with Next Dimension, X-Men fighting games that took very obvious inspirations from the Versus games. An inspiration development staff for those games openly cited. Mutant Academy 2 and Next Dimension in particular are really fun fighters, if a bit jank, but I really want to cover them someday because they're incredibly fun. Tony Daniels has also done voice work for other Capcom games, most notably Spawn in The Demon's Hand and Devil May Cry 1, where he provided the voice of Mundus. I'd say Capcom did a fantastic job with Gambit overall, but let's take a closer look at why that is. Gambit's a character that, true to his slippery nature, can use the environment to his advantage to confuse and disorient the opponent before initiating his offense. His X-Men vs. Street Fighter theme is a pretty great tune with prominent use of that Capcom guitar sample you hear in so many of their early to mid-90s arcade and console titles. His first special move is Kinetic Card, done with a quarter circle forward and punch and can be done in the air. Gambit wouldn't be Gambit without this move. Gambit's affinity for playing cards come from his youth, when after his cousin's thief initiation test goes sideways, they find themselves at the mercy of a mutant child trafficker. During their attempted escape, their captor catches up to them, but Remy takes a playing card his cousin dropped and out of desperation, charges it before flinging it, injuring their pursuer's eye. Quarter circle and back is Trick Card. Gambit pulls out a few cards and flings them at a 45-degree angle. This is an anti-air, but because of its noticeable startup, this works best as either a predictive anti-air on a jump-happy opponent, or against someone super jumping against you. Dragon Punch and any punch button gives you Cajun Slash. Gambit has 3 variations of this. The light version is a single strike, the medium version is 3 strikes, and the heavy version is like the medium one, but he doesn't do the little hop at the beginning of it, and it has OTG properties. Cajun Escape is done with a flash kick motion, but there's some additional complexity to it. Where Gambit wall jumps is dependent on the direction you end the up motion at. Up back has him jump from the wall behind him, and up forward has him leap to the other wall. If you flick the opposite direction right before Gambit touches the wall, he'll do an additional flip afterwards, which can definitely keep your opponent guessing. Gambit also has a follow-up strike he can do afterwards by pressing punch. It's really fast though, so you need to time it right. Cajun Strike functions very similarly, but is done with a kick button instead, and Gambit automatically attacks with a dive kick, with the trajectory dictated by the strength of the kick button. Gambit can also do an additional flip here as well by inputting the same opposite motion when you touch a wall. Gambit's lone hyper combo in this game is Royal Flush, done with a quarter circle forward and 2 punches. Gambit throws his staff in the air before throwing out 37 playing cards charged with energy before detonating them all at once. This move OTGs and can be used after a sweep. Note that Gambit throws his staff up in the air before throwing the cards. If your opponent happens to jump and hit the staff, they'll actually be knocked back down to the ground and into the hyper combo as well. Can we talk about this super for a second?
Marvelous!
This is quite frankly one of the most stylish supers in fighting game history. I remember seeing this for the first time and freaking out at how cool it was. From the flashing lights with each card strike, to the cool finger snap Gambit does in sync with the card detonations, it's an immensely satisfying super to land, and one of the more memorable in the series. Here are Gambit's colors in the arcade version. And here are his extra colors from the Sega Saturn port. And here is his ending. Gambit's next appearance in the series was as a playable character in Marvel vs. Capcom Clash of Superheroes. Interestingly, he's the only other playable X-Men character on the roster aside from Wolverine, so if that's not a testament to Gambit's 90s popularity, I don't know what is. Gambit's theme is a remix of his theme from X-Men vs. Street Fighter, and somehow manages to sound even more upbeat and energetic than it did in the previous game. Of the 2 versions of the song, this one is by far my favorite. Gambit plays largely the same as he does in X-Men vs. Street Fighter, though he picks up an interesting new super. Cajun Explosion is interesting, in that where Gambit positions himself to initiate it depends on the motion you input. Quarter circle forward will have him jump to the opposite wall, while quarter circle back will have him jump to the wall behind him. Either way, he'll send out large shockwaves at a 45-degree angle once he touches the wall. Gambit also has one of the easiest fighting game infinites of all time in this game. To set it up, simply hit your opponent with a kinetic card, and after, repeatedly alternate between light punch and light kick while holding forward.
Marvelous!
This probably won't earn you many friends, and hell, I've personally gotten the vague threat of being stabbed after doing this to someone, so, you know, do it at your own risk. Here are Gambit's colors in the arcade version. And here are his extra colors in the PS1 port of the game. And here's Gambit's ending. Gambit's a pretty well-known flirt, though of course Rogue is his one true love, and they'd eventually get married down the line in the comics. Speaking of, let's talk Gambit comics. Gambit, being one of the more popular X-Men, has had his fair share of solo books and miniseries, as well as secondary roles in other books. There's the Mr. and Mrs. X book by Kelly Thompson, which follows his and Rogue's post-marriage adventures. That book itself is a follow-up to the Rogue and Gambit miniseries, also written by Thompson, which saw them reignite their relationship while investigating the disappearances of some mutants. He has a fantastic supporting role in Marjorie Liu's 2008 X-23 run, where he functions as something of an older brother figure to X-23, a surprisingly great dynamic. If you want a read that encompasses everything from Gambit's past, to his allegiance to the X-Men and all of the character relationships that entails, there is one run in particular I think fits the bill. And that's Fabian Nicieza's 1999 Gambit series. You can mostly jump into this one blind, though you may see some references made to Gambit being left behind in Antarctica in the past. All you need to know about that is that Gambit had a hand in some pretty messed up stuff in the past, and he was stranded there as punishment. This run starts off with Gambit under the employment of a mysterious benefactor calling themselves the New Sun. They helped Gambit escape from Antarctica, and in exchange, Gambit's been using his thieving skills to procure various objects for him. At the same time, Gambit's been starting to manifest additional powers, like being able to intentionally delay the explosions in his charged objects, though he's not sure why. Eventually, this has him cross paths with all sorts of people, from the Thieves Guild that raised him, to Blade, as well as the Executioner, a former FBI agent that uses discarded alien technology to hunt down mutants. Gambit ends up having his allegiances to both the X-Men and the Thieves Guild that raised him tested, all while New Sun gathers more information about Gambit from the shadows. Things ratchet up when New Sun starts taking a more active role in the plot, and what follows is an interesting exploration of Gambit and the potential upper limits of his powers. It's a pretty fun read, and the New Sun story itself wraps up around issue 20 or so. Like most characters making the transition from Marvel vs. Capcom 1 to 2, Gambit receives minimal changes. The biggest involves the heavy version of his Cajun Slash. Doing a Dragon Punch and Heavy Punch gives you what was the medium version of it in previous games. To do the heavy variation now, you have to do a Dragon Punch motion and press Light Kick and Heavy Punch at the same time. Gambit's first assist is Kinetic Card.
Get ready!
Come on, mon ami.
Get ready!
Come on, mon ami.
His second assist is Cajun Slash.
Get ready!
Come on, mon ami.
Get ready!
Come on, mon ami.
His final assist is his launcher.
Come on, mon ami.
Get ready!
Come on, mon ami.
And here are Gambit's colors. We're not done just yet though. Gambit lost his old Marvel 1 Infinite here, but instead has an even more infamous glitch.
Cajun Strike!
The Gambit Glitch is probably the most well-known glitch in Marvel 2. Marvel 2 in general is a game with a lot of really weird bugs, and a lot of it comes down to the codebase of the game being kind of a fucked up mess of code from previous Versus games piled up on itself. It's a perfect example of what programmers call spaghetti code. This is essentially when something's codebase is so convoluted and volatile that trying to untangle it might just end up breaking more things in the process. People tend to joke about Marvel 2 being the closest thing we've gotten to a commercially released Mugen game, but I don't think people realize just how close that is to the truth. On a surface level, most people are aware that Marvel 2 reuses a ton of sprites from previous games, which makes sense. You don't get a 56 character roster in a fighting game from that era without liberal asset reuse. But under the hood, You'd be surprised just how much of that code dates back to games like Marvel Super Heroes and X-Men vs. Street Fighter. Characters like Charlie and Gambit quite literally had their hitbox data from X-Men vs. Street Fighter nearly copy and pasted over to Marvel 2. Am I saying any of this is a bad thing? No, of course not. Marvel 2 is a godlike game in spite of this, and as I said, you don't get a roster of this size without cutting some corners like this. But this does contextualize why the game has so many esoteric, character-specific game-breaking glitches. Marvel 2 is essentially a game being held together by the programming equivalent of chewing gum and paper clips. You have a ton of code from previous games interacting in ways that were never really intended in the first place, and as a result, the game just kinda bugs out sometimes. Still, it's a testament to the development team's skill that Marvel 2 is as playable as it is. The Gambit Glitch itself is incredibly easy to pull off for how game-breaking it is. The only requirement to perform this is for Gambit to have at least one bar of meter. Simply whiff a snapback specifically for the Assist 2 character on the opponent's team, and immediately perform a Cajun Strike. Gambit realizes that his home planet needs him, and he just flies into orbit. I've heard that Spyro and Bison in some situations can reach them through their tracking teleport and hit him back down, but I've personally never seen it. You might notice I'm using the Dreamcast version of the game for this instead of the HD port, which is what I primarily use for MVC2 footage. That's because the Dreamcast and arcade versions of the game are the only ones that have this glitch. It can't be done in the PS2 and Xbox versions of the game, as well as the PS3 and 360 ports. I mentioned earlier that his Marvel 1 Infinite won't win you any fans, but doing the Gambit glitch back in the day was just about the most asshole-ish thing you could do. If you do this glitch while having the life lead, you essentially win by default because it'll force a timeout. I have seen actual fistfights break out over the use of this glitch. As a kid, my local laundromat was just about the only place in the neighborhood with a Marvel 2 cabinet, and the laundromat operator eventually got rid of the machine because too many fights were breaking out over people using this glitch. That actually ended up being a canon event for me, since it's what made me start begging my parents to get me the home versions of the game to play on my own at home. I'll tell you one thing, it's way easier to convince your parents to get you a game when you can frame it as you being safer playing the game at home instead of the sketchy laundromat. This isn't even the only dumb glitch involving Gambit though. There's one other silly, incredibly character-specific glitch that'll never see use in high-level play because the setup needed for it involves a team of 3 Servbots. All that's required on Gambit's side is again some meter and an assist to call in, preferably a big body character like Hulk or Juggernaut. The Servbot team needs at least 3 meters. The Servbot team has to first initiate a team hyper combo, and immediately after the Super Flash, Gambit needs to call an assist and immediately do the input for Royal Flush. If you did it correctly, the assist should eat all of the hits from the Servbot THC, while Gambit initiates his Super. However, Gambit will be stuck in the animation for the Super as it continues indefinitely, which also kills all of the Servbots as well. Despite all of this craziness, Gambit isn't even the character with the most disruptive glitches in the game. That honor goes to another character, but we'll talk about her some other time. Gambit's one of those characters whose popularity definitely gets seen as a product of the 90s, but I think that's being a bit reductive. Sometimes, a cool design and personality is all a character needs to be cool. And maybe that's why he translates to a fighting game so well. Those are pretty much the only prerequisites for a cool fighting game character. As I mentioned before, he also appears in the Mutant Academy fighting game series as well, though he missed out on Marvel 3, almost assuredly due to Marvel forbidding his use. Still though, he remains a fan favorite choice in the games he's in, even in spite of his tier placements and such. He's just cool. Fighting games are supposed to be cool, right? That's going to do it for this video. Thanks for watching, stay safe, take care, and I'll see you next video.